you got to immediately decide who you're going to follow. Frederick Douglass, a man who was oppressed, a slave, discovered his God-given gifts and talents, and believed our rights come from God, or Karl Marx, who believed your rights come from men and who tried to get rid of religion.
You know, you grew up in a Democratic household.
And I was a Democrat not because I studied both parties, but because I thought I was supposed to be a Democrat. Freedom and Progress, Republican Party, and he did not say Freedom and Progress, Democrat Party. Because here's what I have discovered. Most people who embrace Marxism have never heard the liberty message of Frederick Douglass. And once you hear the liberty message of Frederick Douglass that's in complete contrast to Karl Marx, you get it.
I'm so excited for this conversation today. My guest is a retired U.S. Army officer, nationally recognized speaker, founder of the Frederick Douglass Republican movement. He's an author. He's become a friend. And man, what he's going to share today is so powerful. He's written several books on the life and legacy of Frederick Douglass and comparing his life to Karl Marx. And we're going to get into all of that today on the Defending Freedom Show. And so I'm excited to welcome my guest today, KCarl Smith. KCarl, welcome to the Defending Freedom Show, man.
I'm glad to be back with you again. Always great to rub elbows with you. You know that.
Amen, brother. Man, I'm glad to have you. So, man, let's start off. Let's just I want to go back to how you grew up. You know, I've heard your story, but a lot of our audience hasn't. You know, you grew up in a Democratic household.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what was that like? What is that political identity built on?
I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So my father, being a math genius in 1963, 64, he was recruited by the German scientist Werner von Braun. So we moved from Pine Bluff, Arkansas to Huntsville, Alabama. That's where I grew up. And my parents were staunch Republicans until 1963, 64 time frame. And then because of the Goldwater campaign and all that kind of stuff, when a lot of blacks left the Republican Party, and my parents became Democrats. So my knowledge of being a political party was being a Democrat. And I was a Democrat not because I studied both parties, but because I thought I was supposed to be a Democrat, right? My people in my community were Democrats. The leaders of my community were Democrats. My parents at that time were Democrats. So I grew up with the idea that I was born to be a Democrat, right? So I thought.
Yeah. So we're going to get into Frederick Douglass, man, but I think that was a life-changing moment for you when you encountered Frederick Douglass writing, when you started learning about him. When did you discover Frederick Douglass?
Wow. The point I discovered Frederick Douglass, I knew about him, but I didn't really know him. Somebody sent me a email one time when the emails were becoming popular, started coming out, and there's a quote they sent me, and it grabbed my attention. In that quote, Douglass said, "I am a Republican, a black, dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and never intend to belong to any other party than the Party of Freedom and Progress." Well, being a Democrat, I read Douglass was a Republican. I said, wait a minute, Frederick Douglass was an Uncle Tom? And in that quote, he said, Freedom and Progress, Republican Party, and he did not say Freedom and Progress, Democrat Party. I said, why didn't it say Democrat Party? Why Republican Party? So that started me where I went on a reading binge. I read Douglass' 3 autobiographies. I read almost every biography that was in print I could get my hands on about Douglass, not just about his life, but also about his writings. I read all of his lectures. I read academic papers on Douglass. I mean, I went on like 18-month reading binge on Douglass to learn more about his life, but also to learn more about his philosophy, about liberty and things we're probably going to get into. And so I was just so captivated with this guy, what he was able to accomplish, but also his thoughts on the things we're dealing with today, dealing with liberty and the Constitution, things of those sorts.
Yeah, and so you got into it, you read it, had an impact on your life, you know.
He turned my thinking right side up.
Right.
I'm a graduate of a historical black college, Alabama A&M University. And the one piece of writings that turned my thinking right side up, it happened to deal with the 3/5 clause. So when I was in college, I was taught, and people are still being taught this today, that the Constitution regarding the 3/5 clause meant that blacks are 3/5 of a human being. And then when I read Douglass, what Douglass said about it, 1861, he was in Glasgow, Scotland, and Douglass said the 3/5 clause has nothing to do with the personhood of a black individual. It's all based on limiting the congressional representation of the slave states. When I read that, I said, oh my gosh, what else is it that I don't know that I thought I knew?
Right.
So that right there turned my thinking right side up, the whole thing what Douglass said about the 3/5 clause.
And so when your thinking got turned right side up, that it shifted the way you voted. And then what happened? Was there a family dynamic there? What happened when that took place?
It shifted away in terms of my not the way it did too, but really I got to go back a little bit further. Before I got into Frederick Douglass, what shifted the way I was voting was reading out of the Bible. Now I'm having a brain cramp here. I was reading the Bible where it says, "Examine yourself. Make sure you're solid in the faith. Don't take anything for granted." So I started testing myself. And when I tested myself, I found I was voting the opposite of my values.
Wow.
And so Douglass came in later. So I grew up as a conservative, but that's not the word we use in our community to describe ourselves. I had conservative values, but I wasn't voting that way when I was voting based on the Democrat Party's platform. So when I read that Bible verse, it put me in immediate conflict.
Wow.
I don't believe in same-sex marriage. I don't believe in abortion, but I'm voting that way. And so when I had that come to Jesus moment, that's when God put on my heart that I was a political schizophrenic. I'm voting the opposite of my worship. I raise holy hand on Sundays, but when it comes to voting, I go to that booth, I'm voting the opposite of my worship. And that's a mental illness in my book, biblically speaking.
Yeah, biblically speaking. So the Bible couple, I think Frederick Douglass ended up being the bridge back to communicating with your family, because from what I understand, they didn't take that very well, right?
Yeah. When I started aligning myself with conservatism in the Republican Party, this is before the Frederick Douglass piece came to me. Of course, like many families, you're going to become the Uncle Tom of the family. You're going to be ostracized. You're going to be disinvited from Thanksgiving dinners and from barbecues. That kind of thing went on. But over a period of time, when God started pricking my spirit with the Frederick Douglass moniker and the liberty message of Frederick Douglass, everything changed. I'm proud to say that all my siblings, to include my parents before they passed away, they identified themselves politically as Frederick Douglass Republicans in lieu of saying conservative.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. And so, man, let's unpack Frederick Douglass. Let's unpack his life, his legacy, his values. I mean, why does Frederick Douglass's life matter today, and why is he not the forefront of? I mean, we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of our country. I feel like Frederick Douglass should be right out in front with all the other founding fathers.
Yeah, you got to have Douglass in that conversation. To me, if you're going to talk about the founding principles, the Constitution, liberty, why not have a guy in the center of that conversation who was a slave? Even all these documents had these great things in it, our country really wasn't practicing it. So Douglass, of all people, he will be the one to say, I don't like the Constitution, I disagree with the founding fathers. He didn't say that. He admired the founding fathers, and he called the U.S. Constitution a glorious liberty document. So why not have him in the middle of our focal point of our message? Because, number one, why Douglass? Number one, you can't out-victimize him. Number two, it is impossible, in my view, to win an argument with a runaway slave about his admiration for the founding fathers and his respect for the U.S. Constitution and his whole idea that our rights come from God, not from government. That's the basis of our country, of this great experiment, right? Douglass wrote about that. He spoke about it, but he had a former slave experience. That's what I think makes him so universal.
Wow, that's awesome. And What, so he escaped slavery.
Yeah,
He was a
he
slave.
escaped slavery. So born in 1818. The way I like to put it, since Douglass was born into slavery, he was basically born below poverty.
Mm.
And he was a slave for the first 20 years of his life, never owned a pair of shoes until he was 8 years old, never stepped to bed to age 10. He was homeschooled, self-taught. He started his own homeschooling program to learn how to read and write because it's against the law. And kind of fast forward a little bit, while as a slave, he started a reading ministry on the plantation to teach other slaves how to read and write, to prepare them for liberty. Because Douglass believed that if you can't read and write, even though you escape, you're going to be a slave wherever you go.
Wow.
So literacy was crucial.
Mm-hmm.
That education was crucial. So kind of fast forward a little bit, Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies. Most folks that I've read have only written 1 autobiography. Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies covering different segments of his life. He was an advisor to 5 Republican presidents.
Wow.
Most folks don't get a chance to meet one president. This man was advisor to 5 Republican presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, James Garfield, Rutherford Hayes, and Benjamin Harrison. And this tidbit about Douglass' life just blew my mind based on a couple of biographies I read. And then they say that at the time of his death in 1895, Douglass died of a massive heart attack. This man, who was a slave for 20 years, had $300,000 in savings.
Wow.
That's over $10 million today. So when you think about it, this man began his life as a sub-0 percenter, and he died a 1 percenter. And I was so curious, what was his action plan? How did he achieve this? Because I believe success is not a secret. Success is a system. What was Douglass' system for success? And that's when I learned that he was an avid reader. He understood basically his God-given rights. He took his God-given gifts, his God-given talents. He took his obsession and he made it a profession. That's basically what he did. And then when your purpose in your life is aligned with, or your passion is aligned with God's purpose for your life, God pays child support, right?
Mm-hmm.
Money will follow you. You don't have to chase it. And that's what I learned by studying Douglass. Discover your passion, make sure your passion is aligned with your God-given purpose, and move forward. And God will provide.
Wow, man. And I was on with a guest in a former episode, and we were talking about the history of America and how this stuff just isn't being taught in schools today, And Frederick Douglass, he's not being taught accurately in education. And I would imagine that there are movements that would probably characterize him or use him in a way that's inaccurate. And I mean, why do you think that is?
I think a couple things come to mind. And you bring up a very good point. Most folks know Douglass as an abolitionist, as a former slave. But very few people understand that Douglass is probably the most sophisticated thinkers of his time. Mm-hmm. And they don't see Douglass as a philosopher. But once you understand Douglass as a philosopher, as a thinker, just as a powerful thinker as a Karl Marx or anybody out there, you really look at him differently, and really appreciate his former slave experience and how he took that experience and he articulated that. Because one thing what Douglass did, he wrote out all of his lectures. And by writing all of his lectures out, we have his philosophy, we have his thinking. And that's what I think is missing a lot. People don't see Douglass as a thinker. They may want to quote him, but they don't look at the entirety of things he had to say.
Yeah. Well, a lot of his writings and a lot of his speeches. He has one called, I think it's called the Self-Made Men speech.
Yeah,
and it talks about his view of liberty, effort, personal responsibility. Can you talk about just his work ethic and how he...
That lecture, Self-Made Men, was his favorite speech. His most famous speech was what to the slaves was the 4th of July. But that Self-Made Men speech, he would carry that speech around with him in his pocket. And he probably gave it about 50 or 60 times. And so in that speech, he laid out his action plan for success. And what he talked about, how you become successful. And one thing he says is your work ethic. You got to work, he said. And then once you understand that, you got to become a servant. If you would say you want to be great, you got to serve. You got to become a servant to people. So he applied all these different, matter of fact, I wrote another book. You probably don't know about it yet, but when I wrote Douglass versus Marx, I wrote a book entitled Unchained Ascent. But that book was written about 2 years ago. What Unchained Ascent is, I took Douglass's Self-Made Man lecture, which outlines his action plan for success. I made it more contemporary for the day as a self-help book. And the book is entitled Unchained Ascent, meaning that if you're going to ascend, you have to unchain yourself from things that are going to hold you back. It could be alcoholism, could be a victim mentality, or things of that sort. So if you're going to sin, you got to unchain yourself. And how do you unchain yourself? There's some things you got to look in the mirror, and then you got to apply certain things. You got to apply a work ethic. You got to apply leadership. You got to take education seriously. You got to get the word try out of your vocabulary. You got to get the word impossible out of your vocabulary. Things like that. And that's what Douglass wrote. And here's what I like about Douglass. Whatever you read his action plan for life, the action plan that worked for a slave to become advisor of 5 U.S. presidents, $300,000 a bank, if you apply yourself, that same action plan can work for a free person.
Right. Work for anybody.
That's right. You just have to apply yourself.
Right.
And know what those things are and be serious about it.
That's powerful, man. Well, you mentioned, as you were saying that, you mentioned Karl Marx.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Let's get into that, man. You wrote a book here, Douglass versus Marx, your latest book that you've just published. And,
Douglass versus Marx, The
Battle
for America's Soul. That book did not pop in my head one night I decided to write it. That's really about 15, 16 years in the making. Because the reason why I say that, because it took me a while to understand that Douglass was a philosopher. I didn't just pick that thought up. Because the more I read him, the more I realized this man has a lot to say that we need to hear today. And so I already knew Douglass. I knew Douglass well. And then I just started picking up a book about Karl Marx. And when I saw 1818, both Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass were born in 1818. They were contemporaries. They never met. I said, wait a minute. What a justification. These two men were born in 1818. They never met. The father of communism and America's greatest liberty messenger. What if I put them in the same room and introduced them properly? What would Douglass have to say to Karl Marx? Because by being a student of Douglass, I knew that all the claims of Marxism, Douglass wrote about it. Free speech. Karl Marx called religion the opium of the masses. Douglass talked about religion. Douglass talked about where our God-given rights come from. Karl Marx talked about your rights come from government. Karl Marx talked about the government should take care of the education of your child. Douglass talked about and wrote about parental involvement in the education of the child. Free speech, right to keep and bear arms, immigration. So all the claims of Marxism, Douglass wrote about that. I said, let's put them in the same room. And let's see what happens. So in writing this book, nothing is made up. What Marx said and what Douglass said is actually based on their own beliefs, what they wrote, what they had said in the interviews, and we have source documents to back them up. So in this, it's 31 interviews. They go at it, discussing all the claims of Marxism, every single one of them, even the Constitution, even the 3/5 clause. Because Marx saw the Constitution as a tool used by the oppressor to keep the oppressed down. And but Douglass didn't see that. So it's amazing that two men who were concerned about oppression in the world came up with two totally opposite worldviews. Totally opposite. I said, let them debate this. And so bottom line is, it should be no surprise to anyone that Douglass crushes Marx, not because I rigged it that way, simply because Douglass was right, but also because we had the benefit of history. We can go back to the 19th century, and we can see that wherever Marxism was put in place or implemented, it's always failed. Right. It caused misery, poverty, mass murders. That's why Douglass wins.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Let's talk about Karl Marx for a second, right? So this guy was born into
bourgeoisie comfort. I use his own word.
Yeah.
His father was a lawyer. He married into money. Karl Marx never had a real job in his life. He spent most of his time in coffee shops and in libraries coming up with theories about oppression that he never experienced, by the way. So he wrote about things he never experienced. Frederick Douglass wrote about things that he did experience. He was a slave. He understood oppression.
Mm-hmm.
You see the contrast?
Yes.
And Karl Marx, of course, father was a lawyer. He knew his father. Douglass' father, the rumor was his slave master who put him in slavery. So he really had he didn't have a father in his life. Kind of fast forward that a little bit. Karl Marx, of course, relied on other men's money or other people's money to provide for his family because he wouldn't work. As a matter of fact, in one of the debates in the book, we came up with where Douglass confronts Karl Marx regarding his lack of work ethic in providing for his family. And so in every dialogue, it ends with a drop mic from Frederick Douglass or a zinger, where Douglass just dropped the mic into the debate, right? So in this particular debate, Douglass says to Karl Marx, any man that does not put forth the effort to provide for his family has no business trying to lead a nation.
Amen.
That's a drop mic.
Yep.
And so the one thing I love about the book is, and what people like about it, it's totally non-political. It's good. It's really good versus evil.
Right.
When you think about it.
Right.
It's history.
Right.
What Douglass said, what Marx said. So it's not pumping up any particular party, but it's focusing on the exceptionalism of the founding fathers and why they wrote a document that says we the people and our God-given rights that are unalienable. That's the focus, because that's what Karl Marx was attacking, and that's what Douglass defended based on real life experiences.
Right. It's amazing when I look at the culture today in America, right? It really is good versus evil. And you have a generation today that's caught up in these movements where they kind of embrace Marxism. They embrace socialism. And they don't understand what it does. They don't understand that the fact that they live in a country that gives them the freedoms to do all the things they do. If they embrace a socialist Marxist, those freedoms go away.
That's right.
They don't exist. But yet it's so attractive to people. And versus like Douglass, here's a guy who was in slavery, like you said, below poverty, rose out of that, was a champion for liberty, for the Constitution, for the Declaration of Independence, did all the things he did because of the freedoms given to him by our form of government.
Right.
And people want to tear it down today, and I don't think they fully understand what they're doing and what would happen if they did that.
Because here's what I have discovered. Most people who embrace Marxism have never heard the liberty message from the writings of Frederick Douglass. And once you hear the liberty message of Frederick Douglass that's in complete contrast to Karl Marx, you get it. I go back to Thomas Sowell. I was watching a video, Thomas Sowell was being interviewed, and a lot of people don't know that in his younger days, Thomas Sowell was a devout Marxist. And somebody asked him one time, well, now you're this world-famous conservative economist. What happened? He said, I finally heard the counter message. Frederick Douglass is the counter message. But nobody have never heard that, because it goes back to my previous point. They never introduced Douglass as a philosopher. They may give one or two quotes, but when you get one or two quotes, you can't connect that with him being a philosopher. Okay? But once you understand Douglass is a philosopher, and he wrote about everything that Karl Marx or Marxism or socialism pushes, Douglass wrote about it. Matter of fact, I contend that Douglass defeated Marxism before Marxism became a word. Here's my point why I'm saying that. We know that Douglass wrote extensively about his experience as a slave. He wrote about the plantation slavery. He wrote about the psychology behind slavery. Matter of fact, he had a speech, Douglass, entitled "The Nature of Slavery," and he broke it down. In that speech, he said the first aim of slavery is to separate a man and a woman from God, is to get rid of God.
Wow.
Well, guess what? That's the first aim of Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
So the techniques of oppression used by Marxist regimes are identical to the techniques of oppression used by the plantation slave master. So Douglass wrote about that. And guess what? They're identical to what Marxism is all about. That's why I contend Douglass wrote about and argued against Marxism before Marxism was ever invented. The word was because he wrote about the techniques of slavery on the plantation, which is identical to Marxism. So,
which is crazy because you look at the founders of the BLM movement.
That's right.
And they're riding on this idea that we still have slavery in America, that we're slaves, that there's oppression and people of color and all that. But yet, what you just said was so profound because it's almost ironic because they actually openly came out and said that they are trained Marxists. They're trained Marxists, but they're actually trained from the same philosophy that actually put people into slavery.
Exactly right. That's right. And I guarantee you, they never heard the liberty message of Frederick Douglass. Never heard it.
Wow.
Because why? Well, one thing about the book that I like, and this book is the first book and the only book of its kind. Nobody has ever taken Karl Marx and Frederick Douglass and put them into a debate based on source documents, based on what they wrote, based on their beliefs. Nobody's ever done that. And that's why I'm getting a lot of feedback from people who are buying the book from parents and college students. They're not putting this book on the shelf. They're carrying this book with them because at the end of every debate, you have a reflection, you have talking points, things you can use in your conversations every day to help you better articulate that particular aspect of that debate. I don't care if it's immigration, parental school choice, DEI, equality, the U.S. Constitution. And then you have discussion questions and you have guided solutions to those questions. So it's really a built-in curriculum.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have a great story of a young man, that KJ, that challenged a college professor. Can you tell us that story?
Powerful. So KJ had been reading Douglass versus Marx. And KJ is a college student. And by having been being a reader of Douglass versus Marx, he's in his history class. And this happened last year, by the way. In his history class, the teacher got up and said the Constitution is a racist document, and he referred to the 3/5 clause, saying that he told the students that blacks were considered 3/5 of a person. Well, since KJ had been reading the Douglass versus Marx book, he immediately interjected respectfully and challenged the teacher. He won the argument because what happened, he brought in Douglass. The teacher didn't know what Douglass had said about the 3/5 clause. So Douglass not only won the argument, he won the classroom.
Wow. Because
the students in that classroom came to him afterwards wanting where they could get the book because they want to be informed. And I think that's what has to happen, Colby, is that, no, we're fighting our public school systems and we got to continue that fight because right now our school system, including college campuses, they are, in my opinion, Marxist indoctrination centers. How are we going to fix that? It's a long fight, 20, 30 years. So what we must do, we as parents, as pastors, we got to make sure our children are prepared before they walk into the classroom like KJ was. Just imagine if KJ had not read Douglass versus Marx, had not known anything what Douglass said about the 3/5 clause. He would have to sit there and accept it as truth. Right. He wouldn't know.
Right.
That's why, getting to your point earlier, a lot of young people think socialism is cool because they never heard the liberty message of Frederick Douglass. And when they hear it, you got to immediately decide who you're going to follow. Frederick Douglass, a man who was oppressed, a slave, who rose and discovered his God-given gifts and talents and believed our rights come from God, or Karl Marx, who had never had a real job in his life, who believed Your rights come from men, not government, and who try to get rid of religion. Matter of fact, he called for the elimination of religion. Because under Marxism, if they're going to oppress you and control you, they got to make sure that you don't see anything that's above them. They got to be your God.
Wow.
If they see that you worship or you honor something that's above them, then they have a problem controlling you. And Douglass wrote about that. Yeah. Marxism, slavery, same word for oppression.
Hey, wanted to take a quick break from the show to tell you about one of our sponsors, CDF Supply Co. This is the official merchandise store of Citizens Defending Freedom, and they've got some incredible apparel that they've just launched, everything from hats to hoodies. I'm rocking a hoodie right now, to shirts that you can go on and you can buy right now. It's print on demand. It ships directly to your door. And this is an opportunity for you to wear your faith boldly. And I want to encourage you to buy their merchandise, because every dollar spent on CDF Supply Co.'s website goes right back into the mission of Citizens Defending Freedom to help equip and train churches and pastors and citizens, and then defend them boldly when they step out in faith. So go to CDF Supply Co., wear your faith boldly, be on the lookout for new apparel drops coming soon. Now, let's get back to the show. Right. It's amazing how you get into these conversations and it just becomes very evident really fast that it really is about a biblical Christian worldview versus a satanic demonic worldview. And Karl Marx, open Satanist from what I understand. Now, you can go look at some of his writings and stuff. And here's Douglass, believed in God, just a Christian ordained preacher. Yeah. I mean,
and Karl Marx, based on my readings, he wasn't an atheist. He was a Satanist.
Right.
And so, again, the point is, I want people to understand is that Douglass has been the answer all along. Mm-hmm. Douglass has been the answer how we can really get America back on track by embracing his message of liberty, and because what he says really is in line with the founding principles. But you got a man who was a former slave saying this, that carries a lot of weight. That makes Douglass having such a universal appeal.
Right.
And the left has no answer for that.
Man, such a powerful message. For somebody who's nervous about kind of talking about these subjects or even raising these topics, what would be your advice to them?
Become a student, actually. The Bible says, carefully study to show yourself approved, right? So I would say you got to get a copy of KCarl's latest book, Douglass versus Marx, because what's happening is I'm getting phone calls and emails from people. Pastors are using this book to help them deal with the cultural battle they're facing, because a lot of these pastors, they weren't trained in seminary school how to identify Marxism or how to confront it, and it definitely wasn't trained how to use it, leveraging the life and the liberty message of Frederick Douglass. So the book gives them that. Parents and grandparents are using this book because I got grandparents calling me and parents calling me. They're reading the different dialogues to their child at night before they go to sleep as a story, almost like reading Aesop fables.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that, by the way, starting with my 9-year-old.
Yeah, exactly right. And students use this. I have 8 grandchildren, they're all homeschooled, and I sent a book to my son for the grandkids. They immediately came back saying, "Oh, Paul, we want our own book. I'm not going to wait on Micah to finish reading the book. I need my own book." And they want their own book. And because it's a learning tool. So this is not a history book. A history book tells you what happened. This is a tactical manual. This book tells you how to achieve victory, how to fight Marxism, how to fight the false narrative of Marxism, how to restore godly principles, how to be on the offense and not the defense, and have conversations and not confrontations, how to have a conversation with that child or that grandchild who's going off to college. Now, you didn't raise them as a socialist, but they go to college and become indoctrinated. They come back as a socialist. Now, how do you engage them at the dinner table? How you deliver them from that mindset?
Yeah.
And the answer is Frederick Douglass.
Wow. What's been your experience taking this message into the black community when you go and speak to people?
I'm getting phone calls from black Democrat history teachers. They love it because it's non-political.
Yeah.
It's the truth, what Douglass said. It's the truth, what Karl Marx said. And people want to know the truth. So
Amen.
by being non-political, because some of my other books I wrote, they were pretty political.
Yeah.
But the word Republican's not in here, Democrats not in here, word conservative's not in here, liberal, progressive. No, none of that matters in this.
It's just Douglass versus Marx. Their
that's right.
thoughts,
Douglass
philosophy.
versus Marx, day versus light. Be honest with you, it's that clear. And so when you see the contrast, when you read the dialogues or the debates, the contrast is clear. The contrast is clear. And like I said, these are things that Karl Marx said. These are things that Douglass said about that particular topic. It pops out. And again, one thing about the book, at the end of the book, is there is an extensive source document list. Where I'm not making this stuff up. I'm telling you where I'm getting the information.
Right.
What books I read. Where are these quotes coming from? Where are Karl Marx quotes coming from? It wasn't difficult to find out what Marx had to say. It's out there.
Yeah.
But Douglass took it more of a but having the fact that I had been reading Douglass for years, it made it easier. But the beautiful thing about this, thank God we have the literary legacy of Frederick Douglass to defeat the lies, the false rhetoric of Marxism, socialism. That's why Douglass wins.
All the time, man. That's so awesome. Not to put you on the spot, man, but I think you've got them pretty well memorized. But for our audience, what are the life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass? I'm not going to give the numbers, so in case you can't make it up. But
Well,
you know,
no,
what are some of the things he believed in, man?
I'm gonna put myself under the gun here. So they're basically what we call 12 life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. When you look at Douglass's life, what are the things he spoke about and he leaned on in terms of when it comes to liberty? Well, respect for the U.S. Constitution. He wrote about that extensively, especially in his 4th of July speech coming up. He referred to the Constitution as a glorious liberty document. Respect for life, the belief in the limited power of government, number 3. The belief in personal responsibility comes out of 2 Thessalonians. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. Number 5, free speech. Douglass wrote about that. 6, religious liberty. Douglass also, number 7, I think it's 7, parental school choice.
Wow.
Douglass wrote about economic prosperity. He believed in the free market system. In the debates we have in the book, they're discussing that capitalism. I think the title of that debate is "Capitalism Should Be Done Away With It Because It's Evil." And Douglass starts that debate off saying, "Look, Karl, I'm not going to use the word capitalism. That's the word you invented. I'm gonna call it free market system because it's free. I can engage in contracts if I want to, and I don't. If I don't want to,
Wow.
but that's the word you created. So
Wow.
I'm not going to get caught up in that. That's part of the debate.
That's cool.
Some other. Let me continue the life empowering values. I lost my count, but I think I know where I am. The right to vote. At that time, it was the women's suffrage movement was alive, so Douglass supported women's rights in terms of voting. Okay, immigration, legal immigration. Douglass wrote about immigration. He wrote about open borders, basically. And Douglass told Karl Marx, no, you won't, Douglass says, you want open borders to create chaos and destroy a nation. I want not to be open borders, but I want an orderly fashion where people can come to this country to build this country.
But they had to do it the legal way.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Even back then, that's
That's
amazing.
right. And the last one, I think that number 12 would be, and I always get lost, number 12. I'm stumped on that one.
Oh, well, people can go to your website, they can find it.
Yeah, you can
get
find
the 12
it. You can
life
find it.
empowering
Yeah,
values
it's called the
there.
12 Life Empowering Values, Frederick Douglass. And when you really think about it, they're really called conservative values. But in my teaching, we don't use the word conservative because the left has demonized that word.
Yeah.
So these are life empowering values.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, as we wrap up, man, what's the one thing, if you could, what do you want every viewer to know, man?
That there's a way to save this nation, to change the trajectory. If you have a child that's been indoctrinated into Marxism, the question is, when they go off and go to college, the question is not will they face Marxism indoctrination. The question is, are they going to be prepared and stand strong against it by articulating their values and their faith? Because it's going to come. And Douglass will help them do that, because keep in mind now, Douglass has won these arguments already. We just got to be wise now and take Douglass' arguments and move forth and crush the opposition based on their false rhetoric. Mm-hmm. That's the key. People know Douglass' name, but they don't know his arguments. Once you equip yourself with arguments, you can articulate the aspects of liberty and become a better liberty messenger and inspire people to change how they vote, because they never heard Douglass.
Yeah. You
brought it up earlier. They don't teach Douglass that way.
Right.
But once we understand as citizens, we got to become better liberty messengers, because we can't rely on our institution to teach Douglass. We got to do it.
Right.
That's the key.
We got to set the captives free, man, with this message right here.
Douglass is the answer all the time, and thank God he left us this literary legacy that we can raise now and help us defend the Constitution, defend our God-given rights, and strengthen our families, and protect and equip the young people to prepare them to deal with this, because this fight's not going to end.
Right.
When you and I leave this earth, Satan's not going to stop.
Right.
But we got to equip and prepare our young people how to fight, how to win, and by leveraging the liberty message of Douglass. He won previously.
Amen. Well said, man. Well, KCarl, where can people follow you? Where can they find you? If they want to get a copy of the book or any other resources, where can they go?
Of course, the book is on Amazon, but I encourage you, don't go to Amazon and give Bezos any more money. come to the website, and of course you get our website. Let me give it to you. The website is KCarl, KCarl, KCarl.company.site, SITE, KCarl.company.site. You can email me from there. My phone number is there, and get a copy of the book. And once you buy those items, you'll be on our list. And we'll send something out to you probably the next week or so, because I'm launching a podcast finally.
Nice.
It's called the Friends of Freedom Podcast. And so more information will come out that pretty soon.
All right, everyone. Check out this episode with KCarl. I hope you enjoyed it. And now, me and KCarl, we're going to go over into the red zone. And this is where we take our guest into the other side, where we talk about things that otherwise we wouldn't share on normal platforms. And if you want to catch the conversation that me and KCarl are going to have in the red zone, go subscribe to our Patreon account, join the Defender Circle, and become a part of our family today. All right, KCarl, you ready?
Let's go.
All right, man. Welcome to the red zone.